There's a certain kind of silence that lives out in the Nevada desert. It's not peaceful silence. It's empty silence, endless, like the world has been abandoned and you're the only one left. A man was driving through that desert late one night, headlights carving to pale tunnels across the cracked road. He had been on the highway for hours, the horizon never changing, stars overhead, sharp as broken glass. He hadn't seen another car since sunset, not a single set of headlights, not even a distant pair of taillights fading into the distance. This black road and the faint hum of his engine. He was tired, bone deep, tired. His hands ached on the steering wheel. His eyes burned every time he blinked. He told himself he'd push through until the next town. The desert didn't seem to have one. It stretched on forever, flat and merciless. And then, finally, he saw it. A flicker of light in the distance. Neon, the kind that hums and buzzes in the night air. At first, he thought he might be hallucinating the way light bends when you're exhausted and dehydrated. But as he drew closer, the shape became clearer. A sign, a crooked, rusted sign perched on two thin poles. It read, Motel. Half the letters were burned out, and the O blinked in uneven intervals, buzzing faintly. But it was real. A place to stop, a place to sleep. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a handful of cars scattered like forgotten bones. The building itself was low and long, a row of identical doors facing the cracked asphalt. A single dim light flickered over the office entrance. He pulled in, cut the engine, and stepped out. The desert air was cold, much colder than he expected, and it carried that dry, metallic scent that clings to your skin. Inside the office, the air was stale in the way of places that haven't been aired out in years. A dusty fan turned lazily in the corner, not moving much air at all. Behind the desk sat the clerk. The man didn't look up when the traveler entered. His head was bent low, his skin pale under the yellow lamp. His hair was thin, and his fingers twitched slightly on the desk. When he finally did look up, his eyes were flat and glassy, like he'd been awake for far too long. Room? The clerk asked, voice hoarse. The traveler nodded, rubbing his temples. Yeah, just for one night. The clerk slid a logbook across the desk. No computer, no credit card machine, just an old, stained book with names written in fading ink. The traveler signed, his handwriting shaking from fatigue. The clerk handed him a brass key, heavy, old-fashioned, kind that feels like it belongs to another century. The tag on it read, Room 6 1/2. The traveler frowned. 6 1/2. What kind of number is that? The clerk didn't smile. His voice was flat. End of the hall. Last door on the left. That was all he said. The hallway smelled faintly of mildew. The carpet was stained and spongy underfoot. The wallpaper was peeling at the corners, curling outward like old skin. As he walked, the traveler noticed that most of the other rooms were dark, their doors closed, the numbers crooked on the frames. When he reached the end of the hall, he found his door, room 6 1/2. The number plate was bolted in at an angle, half a digit chipped away. The wood around the knob was scratched, as if someone had clawed at it once. He turned the key and stepped inside. The room was ordinary, almost aggressively ordinary. A queen-sized bed with a faded floral blanket, a dresser with water stains, a TV that looked like it hadn't worked since the 1990s, a single lamp with a crooked shade. But something was missing. There were no mirrors, not a small one above the sink in the bathroom, not one on the wall, not even a cheap plastic one near the door. Nothing. The traveler found it odd, but he was too tired to care. He set his bag down, turned off the light, key, and collapsed onto the bed. The silence pressed against him as he tried to sleep. Not the natural silence of the desert, but something heavier, something unnatural, like the room itself was holding its breath. At some point, he drifted off, but around 3 a.m., he woke suddenly. No dream, no noise, just that prickling feeling at the back of the neck, the instinct that something is wrong. And he heard it, a sound, soft but unmistakable scratching. It was coming from behind the headboard, slow, deliberate, like fingernails dragging across the wall. The traveler froze, heart hammering. He held his breath, listening. The sound moved slightly, as if whoever or whatever was scratching was shifting positions. Finally, he snapped on the lamp. The sound stopped instantly. His eyes scanned the wall. At first, nothing. Then, he saw them. HANTS dot. Faint, greasy marks smeared across the wallpaper. Not dirt, not shadows. Handprints. Small, thin, pressed outward as though they had come from the inside of the wall itself. The traveler reached out and touched the wall. It was ice cold. He sat awake until dawn, every creak of the building making his skin crawl. When the first thin rays of sunlight touched the curtains, he grabbed his bag and left. He didn't bother with the bathroom, didn't shower, didn't even glance back into the room at the front desk. The same clerk sat waiting, same posture, same empty eyes. The traveler hesitated, then finally spoke. His voice was shaky. There are handprints in that room, on the walls, and no mirrors. What the hell is going on? The clerk stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he leaned forward. Mirrors aren't allowed in that room anymore. The traveler blinked. Why? The clerk's lips twitched, almost like a grimace, because people saw things that weren't themselves, watching, smiling, waiting. The traveler left without another word. He drove off, gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Hours later, curiosity got the better of him. He tried to find the motel online. He typed in every town name he thought might be nearby, every highway exit he remembered, but there was nothing, no listing, no photos, not even a record of a motel ever existing in that stretch of desert. And yet, he still remembers the way that wall felt under his fingertips, cold, almost breathing, and sometimes when he closes his eyes at night, he swears he can hear it again, that faint, deliberate scratching from somewhere just beyond the wall. There are certain places you pass on the road that you know, instantly, you don't want to stop at, not because of how they look, but because of how they feel. The kind of places where the neon lights flicker in and out, buzzing faintly, where the parking lot feels too empty, too quiet, even though it's supposed to be a place for travelers, where the air seems to thicken the moment you step out of your car. This story takes place in Arkansas. A young woman was driving alone late one summer evening. She was on her way to visit family, a trip that had stretched much longer than she planned. By midnight, her eyes felt heavy. The road stretched on in darkness. She knew she needed to stop before exhaustion pushed her off the highway. When she finally saw a glowing sign, motel vacancies, she pulled in without thinking twice. The lot was dim, broken pavement, lined with weeds. A single light flickered near the office. The building was the kind you've seen 100 times. One story, long and narrow, with identical doors lined in a row. Inside the office, the air was stale. A faint smell of cigarette smoke hung heavy, even though no one was smoking. Behind the counter sat a man. He looked to be in his late 40s or 50s, with thinning hair and skin that seemed oddly pale in the sickly yellow light. He smiled when she entered. Something about the smile made her uneasy. It didn't reach his eyes. His eyes stayed flat. Traveling alone? He asked as he slid the key across the counter. His tone was casual, but the way he held her gaze made her stomach tighten. Yes, she answered quietly. Trying not to sound nervous, the man leaned slightly forward. If you need anything at all, anything, you just let me know. The way he said it lingered in the air. Too slow, too deliberate. She nodded quickly, grabbed the key, and hurried out. Her room was at the far end of the row. The walls were thin, painted in uneven beige, and the carpet smelled faintly of dampness. But she told herself she was just imagining things. It was only one night. She would sleep, wake up, and be gone before sunrise. For the first hour, she tried to relax. She turned on the TV, but it only produced static. She scrolled her phone, but service was weak. Finally, she turned off the lamp and closed her eyes. Somewhere around 2 a.m., she woke up. At first, she thought it was a dream. A faint sound at her door, a metallic rattle. Then she realized someone was sliding a key into the lock. Her breath caught. The handle turned. The door pushed forward, but stopped against the chain lock she had fastened. The small gap opened just enough for her to see, and there he was, the night clerk. His face was in shadow, but his eyes caught the faint light from the parking lot. He leaned his head in slightly, whispering through the crack, "Just checking in on you." Her blood turned cold. She scrambled out of bed, heart pounding, and shouted for him to leave. She grabbed the phone and dialed the front desk, but the line was dead. When she looked back, the door was closed, locked, silent. She barely slept after that. Every creak of the building felt like footsteps. Every gust of air felt like someone breathing near her ear at dawn. She packed her bag and left without showering, her body trembling with adrenaline. But before she could pull away, she forced herself to walk into the office. She wanted to confront him, to tell him she'd be calling the police, but the counter was empty. The chair was pushed back. The desk was bare, and hanging neatly on the wall was a motel uniform shirt, pressed and clean, with a name tag clipped to the pocket. The clerk wasn't there. Confused, she asked one of the cleaning staff who had just arrived. The woman looked at her with wide eyes. "Sweetheart, there's no clerk here at night. We don't even open the desk after 10 p.m. The evening guy locks up and leaves." Her stomach dropped. She told them what happened, but they just stared at her in silence. The police were called, but no one ever found the man she described. He wasn't an employee. His face didn't match anyone in the system. Whoever he was, he had a key, he had a uniform, he had access, and he had been waiting for her. The highways in Texas stretch out like veins across the desert, endless ribbons of blacktop cutting through nothingness. Travelers who drive them at night often say the road feels like it's pulling you into another world. That's where this story begins, with a couple on a long road trip. They had been driving for hours, their headlights carving tunnels of pale light through the hot night air. The radio cut in and out with static, and their phones had lost service miles ago. By the time they saw the motel sign, it's glowing faintly in the distance. Exhaustion had already set in. They didn't care what the place looked like. All they wanted was a bed. The motel sat hunched by the road, its neon sign buzzing faintly. Vacancy. Half the letters were burned out. The parking lot was cracked, weeds pushing through the concrete. Inside the office, the air smelled of mildew and dust. The clerk barely spoke as he handed them a key. His eyes lingered too long, and his hands trembled as he slid the key across the counter. Their room was at the far end of the row, right beside the old ice machine. The machine groaned and clunked every few minutes, still straining just to stay alive. The couple told themselves it was fine. Just one night. Tomorrow, they'd be back on the road. The room itself was plain. Faded curtains, a sagging mattress, carpet that squished underfoot, damp in places. They turned on the air conditioning, but it rattled and blew out nothing but warm, dusty air. Still, it was enough. They locked the door, drew the curtains, and tried to rest. Around midnight, the wife woke up thirsty. She decided to get some ice for water. The machine outside moaned and groaned, metal clicking as she approached. The hallway was dim, the lights overhead buzzing with flies. She lifted the flap of the ice machine. The air that came out was damp and strangely cold. She reached inside, but instead of ice, her fingers brushed against paper, a folded, wet piece of paper. She pulled it out and unfolded it carefully. The ink had bled from the moisture, but the words were still legible. "Don't stay in room 27. He watches you sleep." Her blood ran cold. She froze, staring at the note in her hands. The hallway seemed suddenly too quiet, the buzzing of the light too sharp. Slowly, she turned to glance at her door. Room 27. Her stomach sank. That was their room. She rushed back inside, locking the door behind her. She shook her husband awake, her hands trembling as she showed him the note. He sat up groggily, his eyes widening as he read the words. They argued in hushed whispers. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe some guest had left it as a joke. But why in the ice machine? Why was it damp, as though it had been sitting there waiting? The husband wanted to brush it off, but the wife couldn't shake the dread clawing at her chest. She swore she felt eyes on them, even with the curtains closed, as the night dragged on. They kept waking at small sounds, the groan of the ice machine, footsteps in the hallway that never reached their door, and once, the faint click of a doorknob turning, though the lock held. Neither of them slept much. At dawn, they hurried to check out. When the husband handed the key back, he mentioned a note. The clerk's face drained of color. His lips tightened, and for a long moment, he said nothing. Finally, in a low voice, he muttered, "You should count yourself lucky." You woke up. The couple exchanged a look, confused and unsettled. On the way out, the wife asked the clerk what he meant. His eyes darted toward the row of rooms. "Years back," he said, his voice trembling, "a man stayed in room 27. No one knows his name, but people started going missing. Travelers, families. They'd check in and never check out. When the police finally searched the room, it was empty. Just a bed, just walls. But everyone swore. They felt someone watching, right from the corner of the room, like a shadow that wasn't there." The husband asked if the man was ever caught. The clerk shook his head. They never found him, but the disappearances stopped for a while. Then, one night, another guest found a note, just like yours. After that, people started leaving warnings, slipping them into drawers, into vents, into the ice machine. Nobody admits to writing them, but they keep showing up. The couple left in silence, their hearts pounding. To this day, they swear the note wasn't old. The ink was fresh. Someone had written it for them. And sometimes, when the wife dreams, she wakes with the memory of eyes watching from the dark corner of room 27. Eyes that never blinked. I was 19 when it happened, driving across the country on my way to see a friend I hadn't spoken to in years. My car was old, beat up, and barely holding together, so every couple hundred miles, I had to pull over somewhere to give both of us a rest. That night, I pulled into a small roadside motel just outside a forgotten little town in the middle of nowhere. The motel looked like it had been standing there for decades, maybe longer. Its neon sign flickered weakly, buzzing in the night like a dying insect. Vacancy blinked in and out, and for a second I thought about driving further, but the fatigue in my bones told me I couldn't keep going. Inside, the lobby smelled of old carpet and something faintly metallic, almost like rust or blood. The man at the counter didn't look up when I walked in. His skin was pale, stretched too tightly across his face, and his lips were cracked. When I asked if there were any rooms available, he slid a single key across the counter without a word. No number on it, just a heavy, tarnished brass key on a ring. I stared at it, then at him. "Which room?" I asked. He finally lifted his eyes to me. They were watery, glazed, as if he hadn't slept in days. "You'll know it," he whispered. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Something about the way he said it felt wrong, like it wasn't an answer, but a warning. Still, I was too tired to argue. When I stepped outside, the night was thick, and heavy. I walked along the row doors, room 3, room 5, room 5. The numbers were faded, but they were there. Then, halfway down, I noticed it. A door with no number at all. Just blank wood, the paint peeling around the handle. The key fit perfectly. When I opened the door, a draft of cold air rushed out, far colder than the night outside. The room was dim, lit only by a single bulb in the corner that flickered as though it was struggling to stay alive. The walls were stained yellow with age, and the bedspread was torn in several places, stuffing spilling out. The smell hit me neck damp, mold, and something sickly sweet. I told myself it was fine. I was exhausted. I just needed a few hours of sleep. I set my bag down and collapsed onto the bed. That's when I noticed something. The walls. They weren't just stained. They were scratched. Dozens, maybe hundreds, of claw-like marks gouged into the plaster. Long grooves trailing in every direction. I froze, staring at them, my heartbeat quickening. Who or what had left those marks? I pulled the thin blanket over me and tried to ignore it. But then, sometime after midnight, I woke up. Not because of a sound, but because of silence. A silence so heavy it pressed down on me like weight. My ears rang with it. I sat up, looking around, and then I saw it. The door, it was open. I was sure I had locked it. I remembered turning the key and hearing the click, but now it hung slightly ajar, the hallway beyond blacker than night. I got up slowly, every nerve in my body screaming not to move closer. I reached out, pushed it shut, locked it again, and pressed my back against it. My chest heaved with panic. That's when I heard Eton, the other side of the door, breathing, long, ragged, uneven breaths, inches away from where I stood. Whoever was out there wasn't moving, just breathing, waiting. I backed away, my eyes darting to the scratches on the wall again. I couldn't stay here. I had to leave. I grabbed my bag and rushed to the door, unlocking it in a frenzy. I yanked it. Open. The hallway was empty, but the air outside was colder. Wrong. The other doors were gone. The hallway stretched endlessly in both directions. No windows, no exit signs, no escape. Just door after door after door, all blank. All identical to the one I had just left. I slammed my door shut, heart racing, sweat pouring down my face. I stumbled backwards and collapsed onto the bed. Maybe I was dreaming. Maybe this was exhaustion playing tricks on me. I buried my face in my hands, trying to calm down. And that's when the scratching started. Not from the walls this time, from under the bed. Slow, deliberate scrapes, like nails dragging across the wooden floorboards. I froze, too afraid to move, too afraid to look. The sound grew louder, closer, until I swore whatever was under there was right beneath me, waiting, and then it spoke. A whisper, low and hoarse, seeping from the shadows beneath the mattress. Don't. Stay here. I bolted. I didn't even grab my bag. I tore open the door and ran down the endless hallway, pounding on doors, screaming for help. But every door I tried was locked. Every corridor stretched further than it should have, twisting into darkness. Finally, I saw a faint red glow at the end, an exit sign. I sprinted toward it, my lungs burning, my legs aching. When I burst through the door, I stumbled back into the lobby. The man at the counter was still there, waiting. He looked up at me, expressionless. "You found it?" he said quietly. I couldn't speak. My throat was dry, my heart still racing. I backed away, out the door, into the night. When I turned to look back, the motel was gone. Just empty desert, stretching for miles. No building, no neon sign, no vacancy. I never found my bag. I never found that road again. But sometimes, at night, I still hear that whisper in my dreams. Don't. Stay here. I was driving through the Midwest late one summer night, the kind of night where the heat clings to your skin even with the windows down. The road stretched on endlessly, and the radio was nothing but static between stations. By midnight, exhaustion set in. My eyes burned, my hands shook faintly from the long drive, when I saw a flickering sign in the distance of glowing red Motel. Pulled off without a second thought. The building looked like it had been abandoned years ago. Paint peeled from the wooden siding, and weeds sprouted through cracks in the parking lot. But the neon sign still sputtered faintly, buzzing like it had no business still working. Inside, the lobby smelled of dust and mildew. The wallpaper was peeling in long strips, and a moth circled lazily around a bare bulb above the counter. The man who checked me and looked like he hadn't moved in decades. His eyes were watery, sunk deep into his skull, his skin waxy under the light. He spoke slowly, almost as though each word was an effort. "Cash only," he rasped. I handed him a crumpled 20. Without counting it, he slid a key toward me. It was old, heavy, with the number 12 etched into a tarnished brass tag. His fingers lingered on it longer than necessary, as if reluctant to let go. When I asked about checkout time, he only smiled faintly and said, "Sunrise." Something in his tone made my chest tighten, but I forced a nod and carried my bag down the dim hallway. The carpet was damp under my shoes, squelching faintly as I walked. The doors I passed were all mismatched different woods, different paints, like they'd been replaced over time. Room 12 was at the very end. The key turned stiffly in the lock, grinding as though it hadn't been used in years. When the door opened, a wave of stale air hit me thick, suffocating, heavy with something I couldn't place. The room was small and simple, a single bed with yellowed sheets, a chair in the corner, a cracked mirror on the wall. The lamp by the bed flickered weakly, barely pushing back the darkness. I told myself it didn't matter. I was just there to sleep. A few hours, then back on the road. But the moment I lay down, I knew something was wrong. The silence was too deep. Not just quiet, but hollow. No hum of air conditioning, no cars passing outside, not even crickets. Just emptiness. I turned on my side, staring at the mirror across the room. It reflected the bed, the lamp, and the door. Nothing unusual, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I shouldn't look away. Sometime around 2 a.m., I woke with a start. My throat was dry, my chest heavy. The room was darker than before, as though the light had dimmed further. That's when I noticed it, the mirror. There was something in it. At first, thought it was me, just my reflection, but the angle was wrong. The figure in the glass was sitting upright, while I was lying flat, its head tilted slowly to the side, movements unnatural, jerky, like a puppet. I couldn't breathe. I forced myself up, staring at it, and as I did, it stared back. My reflection's face stretched into a grin I knew wasn't mine wide. Too wide, teeth sharp in the dim light. I stumbled to the lamp, flicked it off. The reflection was gone, but the chair in the corner, the one that had been empty when I entered now, wasn't. Something sat there. It was too dark to see clearly. Just a shape, hunched and heavy, shoulders rising and falling with slow breaths. The air grew colder, the stench stronger, like rot. My heart pounded so loudly I swore it would wake the thing. I pressed myself against the wall, trembling, eyes locked on the chair. But when I blinked, just one sit was empty again. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the weight of someone watching. The mirror, the chair, the corners of the room where the shadows pooled too thickly. And then, just before dawn, came the knocking, not on the door, on the walls, soft at first, then louder, rhythmic, surrounded me, fists pounding from every direction. I clutched the sheets to my chest, eyes wide, ears ringing. The wall shook as if dozens of hands were trapped inside, desperate to claw their way out. Finally, the noise stopped. Silence fell heavy again, and then, from right beside the bed, voice whispered, low, wet, guttural, time's up. The lamp shattered. The room plunged into darkness. I don't remember leaving. I only remember stumbling into the early morning light, gasping for air as though I'd been drowning. My car was still in a lot, dew clinging to its windshield. I didn't question it. I drove until the motel was a memory in the rearview mirror. Later, I tried to find it again. Highway 6, the exit, the sign, nothing. No motel, no building, no trace of it ever existing. But sometimes, when I look in mirrors too long, I see that smile again, the one that wasn't mine, and I remember the voice. Time's up.